on the News Channel 5 network. This is OpenLine.
Happy Halloween, everyone. It is Halloween, so once again, we're going to be talking about some pretty interesting stuff. I want to begin with this. In the 1800s, John Bell moved his family from North Carolina to Robertson County. What happened next is the stuff of Halloween legend and really has led to the best documented ghost story in history. We're, of course, talking about the Bell Witch. Happy to have with us Pat Fitzhugh, who is a Bell Witch historian. Pat, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
So, Bell Witch historian, that's interesting. All right, I don't know a ton about this, all right? I want to just kind of, make this Bell Witch 101. What happened,
right.
How, when I say it's the most documented ghost story in American history, what do we mean? But let's take it from the top. What happened with the Bell Witch?
Well, the case involves an early pioneer family in northern Middle Tennessee who experienced some type of visitation from an entity that they could not see but hear. And it began with raps on the walls outside the house, then spread into the house with the sounds of chains being dragged across the floor, stones being dropped on the roof, and it just went downhill from there. The children complained of their bed covers being pulled back, and by the winter of 1817, the children were even being slapped by invisible hands.
So this is so unusual. So what we're saying is this ghost could come out and touch people.
Yes.
Really mess with them. Not just show up and scare them, but really mess with them. And this was not a nice ghost, right?
No, not at all. And it seemed to feed off of people's fear. The more things it did, the more people became afraid, paid more attention to it, and the stronger it grew. And eventually, about a year and a half after the first manifestation, it began to whisper. And that whisper gradually evolved into a voice as more and more people heard about this and came to witness it.
So if I said, I don't believe it, and I mean, what can you say to say, well, you're crazy not to believe it? Or what is the proof that the Bell Witch existed?
Well, standard of proof varies from person to person. For me, I have a very high standard of proof, so to me, there has never been any proof that it existed. Just a lot of story evidence and a lot of things, that are compelling, but not necessarily persuasive. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been researching it for the last 40 years, and I still feel I've just barely scraped the surface. But as far as hardcore proof is concerned, there's not any proof that the entity existed, but there's plenty proof that the people and places involved in the legend existed, and there are plenty old manuscripts and other writings from people of the day, from farmers all the way to members of the clergy, lawyers who wrote about experiencing this thing.
And is that where we get
accounts.
Is that where you get the most documented ghost story in history?
Yes.
Because there's so many people who wrote about that they saw it. They put their name on paper and said, I saw this, this, and this.
And put their reputation and credibility on the line.
What possible motive would they have for not telling the truth about it?
Well, one of the things I have been looking at over the last 40 years is whether perhaps this whole thing is a big cover-up for something. Assuming that a paranormal entity did not create disturbances in the Bell home, perhaps something else happened.
That's interesting.
Perhaps a cover-up, perhaps a jealous boyfriend of the daughter.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of possibilities, whether you look at it from a supernatural and paranormal standpoint or a human standpoint or hoax standpoint, there are many possibilities.
No one back then, was anyone making money off the ghost? I mean, when I hear that there was a funeral, right? And then at the funeral, the ghost was singing and I guess taunting to some extent. But everyone at the funeral heard it. So all those people are saying this happened. What would the motive of all those people be to say that they heard something at this funeral? I mean, to me, that means it's true. I'm fascinated that happened. Why would they be untruthful about that?
Well, you have to, different people, may have different motives for different things. There could have been, possibly been a cover-up. There's a little bit of evidence that might have been the case. But then, like you say, maybe it was true. Then again, maybe it was a case like that happened up in the Northeast many years earlier, whereby the crops were poisoned and a bacteria developed, and people were having hallucinations, and they thought these things they were seeing and experiencing were real. And they swore up and down they were real. Come to find out, it was poison in the crops. Oh, no. I'm not saying this happened with the Bell Witch because I haven't found any evidence of that yet. But I'm saying, it's just hard to question the testimony of such a somber era and the people who no longer exist. There's very little to go on.
I'm amazed when you read, I've read bits and pieces about Andrew Jackson. Was it Andrew Jackson who came there?
Okay, one of the biggest Bell Witch stories, or the most popular people enjoy hearing, is that of General Andrew Jackson and his men.
So tell us that story, because I've read a little bit about it. That's kind of amazing.
They allegedly visited the Bell farm in early 1819. Mr. Bell's two older sons had fought under Jackson in the War of 1812 at New Orleans and Horseshoe Bend.
And that's a fact, right?
That is, yes.
Okay.
And it's also a fact that Jackson owned a tract of land only a couple of miles from the Bell home.
Okay.
So we know he possibly had reason to visit the Bells. But according to the legend, Jackson and his men went to the Bell farm to investigate this thing, and upon reaching the property line, the horses and the wagons stopped, and they couldn't get them to move. Then a voice came out of the trees, a disembodied voice, and had said, "It's okay, General, you can move on now. I'll talk to you tonight." But then,
so is the general signed off on this? Is the general saying that he heard a disembodied voice say, "It's okay, you can move on now"?
No, not at all.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure.
In my research, like I say, he, according to facts, he had reason to visit the area and possibly to visit the Bells, but there's no historical proof that he actually encountered the Bell Witch. In fact, to the contrary, he was not even in Tennessee hardly at all during that 4-year period of the Bell Witch disturbances.
Oh, so this could be a bit of legend going on here.
Definitely.
Okay, so go on with the story. I won't interrupt now and ask about such detail.
That's okay.
But okay, so a disembodied voice comes and says, "You may proceed." After the horses were like, "No, I don't want to go."
Right. And the horses trotted on. No problems after that. So Jackson and his men got up to the Bell home. They pitched their tents in the front yard. They met the Bell family, sat down, had a great dinner that evening, sang some hymns. Jackson told a lot of war stories. And at some point late that night, one of Jackson's men pointed out that they had seen nor heard nothing since they had been inside the Bell home, and that it was most likely because he had a gun and a silver bullet that was known as a witch tamer, and this thing was scared to manifest itself because it knew he would shoot it.
Okay, good for him.
And according to legend, as soon as he said that, he encountered a very swift and hard kick to his posterior region and was kicked all the way out the front door of the Bell home. And at that point, the entity, who by that time had developed a full voice, spoke up and said, "General, this man is an old fraud. He's no good. And I'll tell you, you have another fraud in your party. And tomorrow night, I'm going to call him out."
Wow.
So of course,
So this witch had a flair for the dramatic.
very much so, had a sense of humor that was out of this world, had a mouth that was dirtier than any sailor's mouth, and loved to argue scripture with the preachers.
All right.
It was an amazing thing, and it changed, its characteristics, everything from the knocking on the walls at first, which would suggest poltergeist activity, all the way to the thing singing hymns and talking and predicting the future, which suggests more of a spiritual type thing. It was a lot of different things over that 4-year period.
So what is where did this Andrew Jackson story come from?
The first part, the first place the Andrew Jackson story showed up was in a manuscript called Our Family Trouble, written by Richard Williams Bell, who is the second youngest son of John Bell Sr. And that manuscript was first released to the public in 1894 in the first commercially published book about the Bell Witch.
So you're a Bell Witch historian, right?
Mm-hmm.
How willing has the family been, I guess, to talk with you? How hard is it to be a Bell Witch historian?
Well, it has its good days and it has its hard days, but like I tell people, it's been one heck of a ride. You meet a lot of nice and interesting people, you learn a lot of things, you spend an awful lot of money and drive an awful lot of miles. But it's been good. I'm satisfied with what I have discovered so far, but like I said earlier, I don't think it even scrapes the surface of what else is there. But the passage of time makes it hard to get evidence sometime. Each year that passes, I'm sure there's something somewhere that goes away that I'm not going to be able to find. As far as the family is concerned, I've had the privilege of meeting a lot of Bell descendants. I interviewed quite a few before writing my book, The Bell Witch, The Full Account, and I still meet them. In fact, I met one the other day, a direct descendant. There's not a consensus among Bell descendants as to whether the Bell Witch existed. Some are very hardcore believers, others are staunch skeptics. Others, when you mention the Bell Witch word, they'll say, I'm not going to talk about it, and they will turn around and walk away.
But someone has spent a great deal of time coming up with stories and all kinds of stuff. This is a very detailed story you're talking about with Andrew Jackson.
Right.
That you're also saying may not have happened because Andrew Jackson was gone for a long period of time. It makes sense because he had property near there. That's a fact. Makes sense Bell descendant fought with him in the War of 1812.
Right.
That's a fact. But he was gone for a long period in there, and some of those details in that story are a little hard to wrap your mind around.
Exactly. I mean, I think we can reasonably place Jackson at the Bell home or around the Bell home, but not necessarily during that time period when he was away from the mid-state and when he was very sick as well. But the chances of him being there right then, it's contradicted by historical fact. He might have visited sometime, but we don't have any evidence saying that he really encountered the Bell Witch. But then again, a major general in the Army with political aspirations, would they write about going out into the country and talking to a supernatural entity? Don't know.
I mean, they wouldn't today.
No.
Today it would be suicide.
Right.
But today you have Facebook and Twitter. Somebody would have gotten a picture
Exactly.
of this talking witch and put it out there, so we wouldn't have to worry about this. We didn't have that back then.
Right.
All right, we're going to take a break. I want to hear from y'all. What do you think? What do you think about the Bell Witch? It's Halloween. You've heard from this from the Bell Witch historian here. There's some to think about on both sides, really. What are your thoughts? It's kind of a beloved legend of Middle Tennessee. We all have some sort of story about some connection to the Bell Witch over Halloween. What's yours? So give us a call. There's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.